So much to Jonathan and Claudia. It's great to be here. Claudia especially, I feel you've worked very hard to make this happen. I'm sure there are lots of people who I haven't yet met, whose names I don't know yet, who've made this happen, so thank you, and I'm very much looking forward to spending more time learning with everybody together over Shabbat, and it's always a big joy to get to know communities around the world via being able to teach and learn together with one another. And I will also admit that having spent 7 or 8 very, very intense months in Israel since October 7th, having a few days in this beautiful country to linshom, to breathe, to see the mountains, to see the snow has been very, very good for the neshama. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. Okay, we've got a lot to do tonight. Is there a set end time, just so I know how to pace everything? 4 hours. Careful what you say, because there's a lot of material. So be careful as you say. Let's have a go. Okay, I'm very, very glad that Claudia and the powers that be decided upon this topic. It's one which is very close to my heart. It's really one of my favourite pieces to learn and to teach. It's one that I've spent many years with, and every time something new comes up, and hopefully it touches on some quite important and profound ideas. So, we are very, very close to Lag BaOmer. We are deep within the Omer. And the Omer is, I don't think we spend enough time actually thinking deeply about how much is placed into the Omer. You have these 7 weeks which have sort of got all of Jewish history contained within them. You have Yetziat Mitzrayim to Matan Torah, you have the 20th century, you have agriculture, you have so much taking place within it. It's sort of just compressed into it is so much. And the Omer is torn between different emotions. There's joy, there's progression towards Har Sinai, but there's also Tzad Avelut. There is an element of national mourning, especially in Ashkenazi communities, becoming pronounced, especially during the Middle Ages, period of the Crusades, and that leaves its roshem, its impression on the Omer until today. But the very, very beginning of the tragic element of the Omer, begins with the students of Rabbi Akiva. And we read as follows in the Gemara in Masechet Yevamot, Sukh number 1. Amru, 12,000 zugim talmidim hayu lo leRabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, 12,000 sets of students, 24,000 students. Migivat ad Antipras, from the north to the south. V'kulan meitu beperek echad. And they all died at a single time. Because they did not honor one another. The Gemara carries on, I'm sorry to put it on the sheet. It was at this time of the year, and the plague stopped on Lag BaOmer, according to one of the versions. So Lag BaOmer, 2 days from now, is the moment when this terrible plague ends. Some terrible tragedy happens during this generation. And just to take seriously that number, Rabbi Akiva, the greatest teacher of his generation, who is one of the key links in the chain which is going to bring Torah from one generation to the next, sees, we don't know what percentage of his students, but it must be a very, very high percentage, perhaps almost all of them, are wiped out in a single go. How does this happen? There are people who like to connect it to the Bar Kokhba revolts, that Rabbi Akiva was a supporter of Bar Kokhba, and his students were soldiers in Bar Kokhba's army. I think we say about that in Hebrew, Ikar Chaser Min HaSefer. It doesn't say that, right? That idea is absent in the text. The text says, they didn't honor one another, they didn't treat one another correctly. It's very terse, it's very cryptic. Treat one another correctly. What could that mean? I want to try tonight to try and suggest something, to try and get a sense of what the culture was like, what the atmosphere was like, what the key ideas were in the world that Rabbi Akiva's students inhabited, to try and get a sense of this. Okay, let's begin. We're going to need to look at a few different characters. So before we get to Rabbi Akiva, we're going to meet some of the other significant characters of his generation. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the great rabbi who is able to see Judaism through the destruction of the temple in the year 70, and to being able to survive, he goes to Yavne, he raises up students there, this community of scholars, and he has 5 students. Chamisha Talmidim hayu lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And we are going to be interested in one specific one of those students, who was a teacher of Rabbi Akiva, but also a contemporary, also someone who he was on the same level as, and with whom he had very, very substantial and significant differences, which we're going to see. This person that we're going to look at is called Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkens. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would recount the praises. He would praise his students, and this is what he would say. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkens Bor Sid she'eno ma'abed tipa. He is a bore, a pit, or a cistern which doesn't lose a drop. When it contains water, it holds all of it. I don't know if anybody here has ever received such a compliment. If Eyal, if anyone's ever said to you, you are a cistern, I don't know if anybody has, I personally haven't. But clearly Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai means something very complimentary about his student. We're going to have a lot of metaphors tonight, which we're going to try and pick apart. What does this mean? What does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say about his student, about Rabbi Eliezer? What is the nature of his Torah?
He never forget what he learned.
Excellent. He does not forget what he learns. That's one very important part of it. Anything else?
And he's not much innovative. It is the negative part.
Okay. Very, very interesting that you see that. We'll come to that idea. So he doesn't lose anything. And let's develop this idea somewhat. Water, mayim nimshel Torah. Water is compared to Torah, and I think part of the reason for that is that water is a very flexible metaphor. You can do lots with it. So another one of the students, one who we're not going to look at today, is called Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. Anybody know what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says about him? He calls him Ma'ayan HaMitgaber. He is an overflowing stream. Right? His Torah is like a stream which is always coming out. And now you've got movement and you've got creativity, right? But with Rabbi Eliezer, where the water is held in the cistern, it doesn't move, right? The water stays in the same place. He remembers a huge amount. I think that's also an element of it, right? It's not a small thing which doesn't lose a drop. It's a huge amount which doesn't lose a drop. But it doesn't move. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says about him that his greatness is so much that if all the sages of Israel were on one side of the scales and he was on the other, haya machri'a et kulam, he would outweigh all of them. That is how much he knows. What's your name, sir, please?
Eidler, Yosef Yitzchak Eidler.
I'll try Mr. Eidler, I'll go for one. This point of yours about innovation. We're going to look at a fascinating Gemara now. I like this Gemara very much. Gemara Masechet Sukkah. Tanu Rabbanan. Maaseh beRabbi Eliezer sheshavat b'Galil ha'elyon. Once Rabbi Eliezer was in the Upper Galilee. It's where my wife and I got engaged, so I was sort of like, think of him around there. That's not why we did it there. Anyway, he's in the Upper Galilee. Galil Elyon on Sukkot. Many lovely Sukkot programs there. And the people who are around him find out that he's there. V'sha'aluhu shloshim They ask him 30 questions about Sukkah, right? You can imagine the people, they hear that this great sage of Israel, the greatest sage, is there, and they've got lots of questions about the Sukkah. My schach is this, it fell down last night, and my etrog broke, etc. Right? You can imagine all the questions they go and ask him. They're very excited. They've got this great sage who they can speak to. And he answers them, he says, I've heard the answer to 12 of these questions. 18 אמר להם לא שמעתי. But 18 of them, I haven't heard the answer. So they say, okay, you are the greatest Torah sage that there is, you know. Put 1 and 2 together maybe, or maybe even if you haven't heard the answer, maybe you could work it out. All that you have, just things that you've heard. So he does not like that question. He says to them as follows. Right? He gives them a long answer. You can imagine him really laying it down. Here's Kaktuni lomar dovar shelo shamati mipi rabotai. I have always been very careful never to say anything that I didn't hear from my teachers. Miyamai lo kadmani adam b'bet midrash. Nobody ever got to the Bet Midrash before me. I was also the first one there. V'lo yashanti b'bet midrash lo shenat kera v'lo shenat harai. I never slept at all in the Bet Midrash. Not a little bit, not a small sleep, and not a big sleep. I always love that line, by the way. I've taught this Gemara in many settings. I've taught it in B'nai Yeshiva, and I've taught it in completely non-Torah scholarly settings, and in the non-Yeshiva type settings, the non-Bet Midrash type settings, they don't get that line at all. Like, what's the big deal? You didn't fall asleep in a Bet Midrash. So, I've never fallen asleep in a shop. I've never fallen asleep in a swimming pool. Like, what's the big boast? You haven't fallen asleep in a Bet Midrash. Of course, anyone who's actually spent time in a Bet Midrash knows that that's a really impressive claim to never have fallen asleep in a Bet Midrash. I used to, if anyone spent time in any good Bet Midrash, and probably, at least a fifth of the people are asleep at any one time. I spent many years studying in Gush, as was mentioned, and I used to get to the Bet Midrash probably at 9:15 or 9:30, and there was a guy who would sit next to me. I'd get there every morning. He would be fast asleep, and Seder Boker would go until 1 o'clock when there was lunch, and amazingly, 1 o'clock hit, he would wake up at 1 o'clock and then go to the Chadarocha. It was remarkable. So now you understand that, for Rabbi Eliezer to say, I never slept, not a bit and not a lot, is a major claim. Anyway, he carries on. Not only was I the first one in, I was also the last one out. And I never spoke anything, frivolous in the Bet Midrash. He repeats the line he said earlier, and I never said anything that I didn't hear from my teachers. And I think, as Mr. Eisner said, this is exactly the completion of the metaphor of what his teacher Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said about him. He remembers a huge amount. Everything he hears, he retains. But at the same time, there is a deep, deep conservatism. There is an aversion to what we call chidush, the idea of something new. The water stays in the system. And it's not just that he's got a great memory, but he's not particularly creative. There are plenty of people like that. It feels to be something ideological, something considered. Because what's the problem with chidush? What would we think is his issue with it, with saying something new? Why would he not, say, give a guess at the other 18 questions?
It's a big responsibility.
He will need to discuss it with his teachers and disagree with them, which he doesn't want.
Okay, so it might be wrong, right? He's not willing to say something that might be wrong. That's a good one element. And I think there's another element, which is it's not sanctioned by Masorah. Meaning, even if it's right, if it hasn't been passed down, it doesn't have the stamp of approval. And that stamp of approval of Masorah, of tradition, is what is needed in order for him to view it as Torah and to pass it on. That is Rabbi Eliezer. And we're going to come back to it. Yes, please.
If the story is true, what does it say about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? That he says he's the most, his biggest sage, comparing to other Chachamim? If this is the element of Rabbi Eliezer?
Well, before we get to the final line, let's think about the lines before it. He produces very different students. I think that's very interesting. Not all of his students are the same as one another. He has a great range of students, and this is talking about his top students. And I think that's actually something quite beautiful to think about, that a great teacher can give different things to different students, or different types of students will come and learn. there's lots to say about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. It's a topic for another time. But I'll perhaps suggest, this is just a guess, so we'll need to think about it more. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lives in the equivalent of 1945. The world that was has been destroyed. The world of the Mikdash, which has stood for hundreds of years. And there is a very genuine question mark of whether or not there will be a Jewish future. And maybe it's Rabbi Eliezer, and hopefully we'll see this more as we carry on tonight, Rabbi Eliezer's ability to keep everything to remember things, to keep things from the world that was, which he sees as, which Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai cherishes. Perhaps. Maybe we'll play that idea out more as we go. We're going to contrast this now to Rabbi Akiva. If you know one thing about Rabbi Akiva, biographical, what is it that you know?
So many things.
He knows even the sound.
Oh, we're going to come to that. But no, that's too much. Something more basic.
He wasn't religious.
He comes to it very, very late, right? He is famously an Am Haaretz, an unlettered, unlearned individual, until the age of 40. Let's look at the Gemara. Right, people familiar with the story of him as a shepherd, a peasant, very foreign to the world of Torah. Ma hiya tchilato shel Rabbi Akiva? What was his beginning? Amru, they said, ben 40 shana haya v'lo shina klum. He was 40, he never learnt a thing. Pam achat, one time, haya omed al pi ha'be'er. He was by a fast-flowing stream, a beautiful waterfall somewhere in the Alps, perhaps. And he sees a stone which has had a big imprint made in it. And he says, who put the dent in this stone? And the people who are there, they say to him, it's the water which falls every day on the stone and makes an imprint. Miyad haya Rabbi Akiva dan kal v'chomer ba'atzmo. Rabbi Akiva made a kal v'chomer straight away. A kal v'chomer, the classic Talmudic argument, what's called in Latin an a fortiori argument. You see a case, one thing, you learn a principle in one case, you apply it over to another. And he says, Ma grach pasal et hakasher. Just as the soft makes an impression on the hard, the water, the soft makes an impression on the rock, which is hard. Divrei Torah, shekashin kabarzen. That's a very interesting phrase. Words of Torah which are as hard as iron is what to explore there. Al achat kama v'kama, how much more so, shechakuku et libi, that they will make an impression on my heart. Shehu basar v'dam, which is just flesh and blood. Chazar limod Torah, he and his son, they go to learn Torah, they go and sit at Selma dating a cop with a kindergarten teacher, they learn Aleph Bet. That's the original story, the story of Rabbi Akiva's origin. And I want to just focus on one little detail in that story. Rabbi Akiva doesn't know Aleph, sorry? Exactly. Rabbi Akiva does not know Aleph Bet. Right? Literally, he is illiterate. But he knows how to make a kal v'chomer. It's almost like within his DNA, it's like wired into his personality, this Talmudic creativity. I'm going to see something over there, and I'm going to extract a principle from it, and I'm going to apply it over there. I see the water on the rock, I will learn something about Torah from it. Even before he's learned Aleph Bet, he has that creativity hardwired into him. What's the opposite of a kal v'chomer?
Yeah, the system.
The opposite of a kal v'chomer is source number 3. The opposite of a kal v'chomer is Rabbi Eliezer, who is asked 30 questions, and he says, 12 I've heard, 18 I haven't heard. And the people say to him, can't you do a kal v'chomer? Can't you learn something from the 12 to the other 18? Can't you extract some principles? And he says, no, that's not what I do. I'm not interested in that. Rabbi Akiva hasn't heard anything from any of his teachers because he hasn't got any teachers. But he is immediately creating one thing to another. Here is a source that we always have to learn, because it's going to continue the thesis which we're suggesting about Rabbi Akiva.
But there is something strange in this story because here he has already a son, and according to the story, he fell in love with.
There are multiple ones. There are various versions of it. When he marries Rachel, etc. Yeah, there's various different versions.
Unless he had two wives.
Maybe. Yeah, fair. Right to paper. So the following Gemara is going to carry on our principle, our theory, the thesis we are suggesting about Rabbi Akiva, but it's also a Gemara which is just worth knowing by itself, completely independent. It's about a man called Nehemiah Ha'amsoni. Nehemiah Ha'amsoni was a very interesting man. He was a scholar, and he had a certain theory. His theory was that every time the word et appears in the Torah, aleph, taf, it comes to include some additional meaning, right? If people speak Hebrew, we use the word et. What does the word et mean? I think it's called an auxiliary word. It doesn't have a translation, but it's grammatically required, but it doesn't have a meaning itself. Nehemiah Ha'amsoni thought every time the word et appeared, there was a special meaning to it. It appears quite a lot in the Torah. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. So, in that first verse of the Torah, there are two hidden meanings within the word et. Haya doresh kol etin shebatorah. He worked out all what the ets meant. And then one terrible day, he came to a pasuk in Devarim chapter 6, Et Hashem Elokecha Tira. The Lord your God you shall fear, v'piresh. And he gave it up. Et Hashem you should fear. That can't include anything else, because the verse itself demands exclusivity to Hashem. Our fear, our reverence is to God, not to others. So the word et can't include anything else. And if it's wrong in that situation, if the thesis doesn't hold in that situation, it's very scientific, then who's to say it holds in any other situation? If he can't find an additional meaning to the word et in the pasuk in the 6th chapter of Devarim, then who's to say that any of the other ets hold true? And so he gives up. Amru lo talmidav, his students say to him, Rebbe, kol etin shedarashta, ma tahei aleihem. All of the ets which you expounded, what are you going to do? One day I was very chnuni and nerdy, and I decided to conduct a search on my Bar Ilan Responsa program of how many times the word et appears between Bereshit chapter 1 verse 1 and Devarim chapter 6 to take the thesis seriously. How many et? Anyone want to guess? Guessing how many sweets there are in the jar at the fair?
Thousands. I don't know.
That's what I guess. Give me 1,000.
1,500.
Yeah, it's 6,000 and something, right? So take the Gemara seriously. He had 6,000 separate theses about the word et. And he says the following line. Just quick pause. I know it's a very Zioni community. Rav Noam told me that there are more Swiss Jews in Israel than there are Swiss Jews in Switzerland. We're just after Yom Ha'atzmaut. There was a famous machloket in the early generations of Zionism between David Ben Gurion and Chaim Nachman Bialik as to whether modern Hebrew should include the word et in it. Right? If you want to guess which way around it was, you should probably be able to get it.
Ben Gurion didn't like the et.
Exactly. Ben Gurion, scientific-minded, rationalist, planned, socialist economy. The et is surplus to requirements, doesn't achieve anything. Of course, Bialik, with the poetic ear, would of course want to keep it. So Nehemiah Ha'amsoni is, I guess, partway between the two. The et is very beloved to him, but it has a purpose. He says the following line to his students, and this line is one that anyone who ever spends any time with Jewish education should always remember. It's a powerful, beautiful line. Kashem shekibalti schar al haprisha, kach kibalti schar al hadrisha. Just as I receive reward for the teaching of it, the drisha, so do I receive reward for the retraction, for saying I was wrong. Such a powerful message, right? We so often think that the value of something is only if it can be shown to be useful. Says Nehemiah Ha'amsoni, it's okay, I'm not distraught that my whole life project was wrong. There is value and importance, there is reward, not only for saying something which I think is right, but also for realizing that what I thought was right is actually wrong. And the Gemara doesn't stop there. If it had stopped there, it would be a beautiful Gemara. We could leave it there. But now Rabbi Akiva comes along, right? Rabbi Sachs always thought this was a very sort of like dark humor Gemara, right? That we now switch around. I'm not sure. Ad Sheba Rabbi Akiva v'limed, until Rabbi Akiva came along and said, actually, I can do it. I can find some additional meaning in this verse. Et Hashem Elokecha tira, et Hashem Yishofenu. And Nehemiah Ha'amsoni said, I can't do anything with that. I can't extract any additional meaning from the et. L'rabot Talmidei Chachamim. That it's to include Talmidei Chachamim, that we should also have reverence for them as well. Rabbi Akiva is able to find the meaning in the word et. Why am I bringing this? There's a lot to say about this Gemara. We'll say some more things about it, but why am I bringing this Gemara? Because who is Rabbi Akiva? He is the person who can always find something fresh in a pasuk, in a text, once everybody else has given up on it. He has got these creative eyes that are able to help him just extract new ideas, even when everybody else has lost them. I once learned this Gemara with a woman for whom it was her first time ever learning. She'd never learned any Jewish texts before. And I taught this Gemara hundreds of times. And she gave the most beautiful interpretation of it, which I had never heard. And she said, oh, it's so beautiful what he's doing. I said, what do you mean? She said, he's restoring Nehemiah Ha'amsoni's dignity. What do you think about his students? His students say to Nehemiah, Kol etin shedarashta matahei aleinen. All of these ets, what are you going to do with them? And he gives this beautiful answer. I get reward for the retraction. What do the students think? All right, great. Maybe not. Maybe they don't buy it, right? Nehemiah Ha'amsoni has lost some of his status, his stature in their eyes. And Rabbi Akiva restores it. He restores it by saying, no, the theory can indeed be correct. And the specific reading that he gives is one about the reverence that they need to have for their teacher. And it was a woman who had never ever learned, and it was literally her first time ever seeing a Gemara, who was able to get something beautiful out of it. It was a very powerful experience for me. I will say that I learned a wonderful reading of this Gemara, which I never heard before, recently. Rav Amital used to like to read this Gemara as follows. Et Hashem Elokecha tira l'rabot Talmidei Chachamim. Talmidei Chachamim are also obligated in Yirat Hashem. I think it was the Kotzker who originally said that. But, pretty good, right? A great reading. Anyway, so what are we doing? We are setting up, we are trying to show that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer are made of different material. The way in which they approach Torah, learning it, teaching it, they bring with them very different minds. Rabbi Eliezer knows so much, and he doesn't forget anything that he has learned. But he is extremely traditional. He will not say anything new, not say anything that he hasn't heard from his teachers. He certainly would not say, Et Hashem Elokecha tira, and get some new reading out of it. Rabbi Akiva doesn't know nearly as much as Rabbi Eliezer, we have to assume. He's got 40 years to catch up on. What does he bring? He brings a creativity. In fact, it's very interesting if we're to really dive deep on this Gemara. How does Rabbi Eliezer honor his teachers and honor the tradition? By saying what they've said and by refusing to say anything else. How does Rabbi Akiva honor the tradition? By having a creative reading, right? Et Hashem Elokecha tira. And we can see these two opinions clash with each other. Right? We see multiple examples of where they fundamentally disagree. We're told about Sukkot, Laman yidu dorotechem, ki b'Sukkot hoshavti et bnei Yisrael. We should have Sukkot on Sukkot in order to know that Hashem put Am Yisrael in Sukkot when they came out of Mitzrayim. So the question is, well, what does that mean? What was the Sukkot that they put them in? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Sukkot mamash shayu. There was Sukkot, right? They lived in Sukkot. So we lived in booths and shacks in the desert, so we do it now. Rabbi Akiva Omer Sukkot ananei kavod hayu. No, it was the clouds of glory, right? Rabbi Akiva's reading is much more, it's creative, it doesn't take the obvious pshuto shemikra reading. There are more examples we could give as well. I'm sorry, I've got so many sources proving essentially the same thing, but I love them all. This one's remarkable midrash, source number 7, in Shiur Shirim Rabbah. It's forgive the sort of like the Chachamim are. Each one is giving a version of why their style of learning is the best, right? You can imagine them sort of like having like a showdown, saying, my learning is better than your learning, my approach is better than your approach. Here's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Im yihyu kol hayamim dayor. If all of the seas were ink, it's very, very poetic. V'agamim kol musin v'shamayim v'aretz megilot, and the whole of the heavens and the earth was parchment to write on. V'chol b'nei adam lebarlim, and every single person on the earth could be a scribe. Right? Imagine the largest possible canvas to write upon. Lo hayu ein maspikin lichtov Torah shelamadati. It wouldn't be enough to hold all of the Torah that I have learned. Big claim, right? Back in the early days of the internet, when blogs were really a thing, I came across a blog where some Jewish e-blog where the person just wrote, and the name of the blog was a very long name. It was good. It was Kol Hayamim Dayor. If all of the seas were ink, and to have inside knowledge for it, but I appreciated it. I know so much that the largest, possible containers in the world before we've had, digitalized memory, wouldn't be able to contain it. That's what he says. Rabbi Akiva, I've cut out a few of the other ones. I was going to say it reminds me of a rap battle where everyone says, what they think is their approach. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ani, me, ein bi koach lomar k'mo she'amru rabotai. I haven't got the strength, the ability. I don't know as much as them. I can't pretend that I do. And the following words, I never really felt I fully understand them, but I'll try and translate them as we go, and perhaps you can help me put it together. Rabotai chisruha v'ani lo chasartem. My teachers are lessened, they lose, chaser in some way, and I am not. I am not diminished. Rather, what am I? What is my Torah like? And the phrase is very hard to understand, but maybe it will be made a bit clearer by what he says. Kamareach be'etrog. I'm like one who smells an etrog. Hamareach neheneh. The person who smells it enjoys it and they benefit. V'ha'etrog lo chaser. But the etrog doesn't lack any, it hasn't lost its scent because somebody has smelt it. I'm like someone who puts a bucket into a fast-flowing stream, right, into a waterfall coming down the mountains. The bucket is full, but I haven't taken away from the stream, is still fast-flowing. Like somebody who has a candle and lights another candle. You've created a new light, you haven't taken away from the initial light.
And what about his rabotav?
That's not them. Now, what does it mean they are lessons? So maybe if someone wants to suggest an understanding of it, I'd appreciate it. But my understanding is sort of the following. Rabbi Eliezer is very quantitative. It's like data, right? 12 shamati, 18 lo shamati. Right? Now he knows a huge amount, and he says if all the heavens and the earth were scrolls, it couldn't connect. But it's still like data, and as soon as I share it with you, now you have it, and it's left my account and it's joined your account. Rabbi Akiva, if somebody has a different reading of it, I'd love to hear it. I'm not 100% convinced of what I'm saying, but it's the best one I've got. Rabbi Akiva is saying, I'm not about data. I'm not quantitative. I don't know as much as my teachers. What can I bring? I bring an approach. I can bring a method. And that method is one of creativity. I can teach my students to look at something else and to be able to apply that to something else. To learn new vistas, to learn new subjects with that. If someone has a different reading of it, I'd love to hear it. But I'm pretty sure that this captures something of what we've been talking about until now.
Maybe Chaser means to limit.
Rabbi Eliezer complained that he could not teach all what he had to teach, so did he said on his deathbed. Donc he was not losing when he was teaching. It remains strange.
It's very certainly strange. How do you think about sharing recipes?
It's like, the person who has the original recipe, they can make a big splash, right? They make a big impression with their delicious food. If they pass it on, okay,
it ceases to be theirs.
It ceases to be there. Yet whoever they pass it on to can take it and work with it, change it a little bit, tweak it, and improve on it.
Right.
So I think that's the kind of idea here that maybe it ceases to be theirs, or it diminishes them in some way because they don't have exclusivity over it, but still they pass it on, and who knows after many generations that recipe.
Rabbi Akiva is Samin Nusrat. If you into cookery books, does that right? Rabbi Akiva, people familiar with Samin Nusrat?
Yeah.
Popular. Don't get into cookbooks now. My wife trained as a chef.
The first sentence recalls us explains us the theme of the poem of Akdamot Milin from Shavuot. It's the same idea at the beginning.
Beautiful, yeah, fair mod. I never thought of that as a connection. Just one more Gemara on this line before we move on. Here's a very short one. Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Tell me how you think this one fits within what we're saying. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Masoret Sayag l'Torah. Rabbi Akiva says that Masorah, the tradition, is a sayag. It's the fence for Torah. How does that fit with who Rabbi Akiva is and what he's saying?
It should be the motto of Rabbi Eliezer.
Do you think it should?
It counters what he does, doesn't it?
No.
He's not following tradition, he's coming up with new ideas and new
Yafeh. So we see how it's a challenge. So here's what I think.
No.
Masorah is the fence for the Torah.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the Torah, it's the fence for the Torah. Within the fence, creativity ascends to the heights and descends to the depths. There was a great philosopher called Michael Wischergrad, Jewish philosopher, early student of Rav Soloveitchik. He was born in Berlin in the 1920s, and his father had been a chess player. That was what he committed his life to. And at one point in his work, Wischergrad says that we can think of halachic Judaism as being similar to a game of chess. There's no game which has its rules as strict and as defined as chess, right? I mean, the rook moves forward; it cannot move diagonally, right? I mean, you can move the rook diagonally, but then you're not playing chess, right? You're doing something else with it. But yet again, because of these, it's specifically these rules which allow for chess to be the game which is also the game of ultimate strategy and creativity, etc. So the Masorah, meaning there has to be some boundary which you can't go beyond in terms of what you can say. Well, you can say it, but it's just you're no longer playing the game. But within it, that allows for the creativity. What would Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer wouldn't say Masoret is Sayag Torah. He'd say Masoret is Torah, right? So that's all there is. There is not anything other than Masoret. Okay, we spent a nice amount of time. Yeah.
The danger of creativity is that it can go any directions. So the Masoret is a guideline for the creativity.
Yafeh Amarta. Yes, very, very good. So that is key here. What we're going to look at, though, tonight, we're going to bring us on to the next stage, is a different danger to creativity. Okay, something else which is lurking within it. So we've spent a long time now looking at these two words. Claudia, you still say 3 or 4 hours is good? Do we want to... okay.
Yes, Siag.
If you want to use the Sayag at any point. Let's see what happens. At a certain point, I mean, I put 9 sources to try and prove this point, but there are many more that we could put. At a certain point, you feel, well, we're onto something here, right? This is a significant machloket they have. And you begin to wonder, is it just about educational methodology, about how we teach, or does it actually reflect something deeper? Does it reflect something more fundamental? Philosophy, different outlook between the two. And I came across these 2 midrashim, and this for me is a bit of this is my chidush, this is my contribution to it. The pieces until now you can find written, so you have Rebbeinu Lau's books, Chachamim, it appears in there and elsewhere. The following is my contribution. 2 midrashim, one about Rabbi Akiva, one about Rabbi Eliezer, which I think are going to show that the differences that we have spoken about until now are not simply what's the best way to read a pasuk, but are reflective of a much more fundamental hashkafat olam, different ways of viewing the world. The first Gemara was actually already mentioned. It's a well-known one. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, B'shar she'ala Moshe Marom, nice Gemara for Shavuot. When Moshe went up on high, מצאו להקדוש ברוך הוא יושב וקושר כתרים לאותיות. He found HaKadosh Baruch Hu attaching crowns to the letters. Amar lefanav, he said to him, Ribono shel olam, master of the universe, mi ma'akev al yadecha, who is holding back your hand? What makes you write this? Amar lo, Hashem says, Adam echad, yesh sha'atid lihyot. There is one man in the future, Besof kama dorot, at the end of several generations, Akiva ben Yosef Shmo, Shatid lidrosh al kol kotz v'kotz tilin v'tilin shel halachot, who will expound every, no one says this in English, but this is the English for every, you know what I'm saying, Eyal?
Tittle.
Yes, every jot and tittle, right? So I know you all have outstanding English, I don't know if everybody knows, the dot of every I, the cross of every T, right? He will expound everything, he will find out everything from it. Amar lefanav. Right, next time I teach this in Israel, I've got to say jot and tittle. Midrosh kol jot v'tittle shel halachot. Amar lefanav. So Moshe is amazed. Ribono shel olam, herehu li. Show me this man. Amar lo, chazar lacharecha. Fantastic. Step into my time machine. Turn around. Halach v'yashav b'sof shmona shuvot. Rabbi Akiva, Moshe goes to sit at the back of the 8th row, the back of the class. Ready for this line? And he does not understand what they are talking about. I mean, it's an incredible Gemara. It's justifiably famous. Tashash kocho. He feels weak. When they get to a certain point in the conversation, in the class, in the learning, his students say to him, to Rabbi Akiva, Rebbe minayin lacha. Where did you get that point from? The point you just made, where did you get that from? Amar lahen, he says to them, halach l'Moshe Sinai. So Masorah, it's a tradition we have. Halach l'Moshe Sinai refers to certain traditions that we have. For instance, the Torah does not say anywhere that tefillin are black and square, right? It's what we call a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, a tradition passed down from Moshe to Sinai. Nitya shavad dato Moshe feels better. This is a remarkable Gemara. Rav Moshe Feinstein, when he wrote his great, very important halachic work, Igrot Moshe is 9 volumes. He only wrote an introduction to one of them, the first volume, and it's only a single page, the introduction to it. This is the Gemara which he puts at the center of his introduction. What on earth does this Gemara mean? I believe a former guest at Midreschet Wollishofen is my friend Rabbi Dr. Rafi Zaran, right? Correct? So Rafi gave me my start in Jewish education. Good friend and colleague, and much hakarat tov to him. And his doctorate, anyone know what his doctorate is?
About theoretical physics.
Yes, exactly. Right. It's not in Torah. He had a career as an academic scientist before he came to Jewish education. So Matim Hamashal, he gives the following appropriate way of explaining this Gemara, which I always use. Isaac Newton comes back to Earth. Okay? Imagine. Isaac Newton returns. And he finds himself in NASA headquarters. Okay? He's invisible. Okay? And he's...
NASA.
He finds himself where?
NASA.
Yes,
Space
yes.
Agency. NASA in Swiss German? Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. So my mother was a German teacher. And, well, my mother has many disappointments in me. High among them is my lack of German. So she's going on at me about how much German I need to speak this week and learn. And she's sending me pieces from Goethe, which she wants me to share with people. Tell her that I've learned the word for NASA in Swiss German. Okay, so Isaac Newton finds himself in NASA, and he's sitting in the cafeteria, again invisible, and he overhears a conversation between a senior scientist and his young assistant. And he doesn't understand what they're talking about. Tashash kocho. He feels terrible. He was the greatest scientist of his time. He doesn't understand a basic lunchtime conversation. And they get to a certain point in the conversation. The junior scientist says to the senior scientist, Rebbe minayin lacha. Where'd you get that point from? Well, he says to second law of Newtonian physics, right? You know, it's clear, obvious. Newton feels bad. What's the point? That Moshe does not recognize the Torah that is being taught in Rabbi Akiva's classroom. It's a new Torah. It's a Torah of Rabbi Akiva, of creativity, which takes something new, and Moshe feels weak from this. Is this the Torah that is being given to him? And he only feels better once he realizes that it has its source, that it is a development from the Torah that he received. Beautiful Gemara. By the way, that's not the end of the Gemara. I didn't put the continuation on. The continuation goes in a different direction, and much more to say. I mean, just to put it almost in more extreme terms, this Gemara, this is astonishing. It's just Amar Rabbi Akiva, dvarim shelo niglu leMoshe miSinai niglu leRabbi Akiva v'chaverav. That is some wild theology there. Things that were not revealed to Moshe were revealed to Rabbi Akiva and his friends, as the Kut Shimoni. Anyway, that is a well-known Gemara that we just learned. Much less well-known is the following Midrash. I found it from Sikta Rabati. There's also a version in the Tanchuma, and that tells us as follows. Similar story. Rabbi Akiva b'shem Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. B'shash ala Moshe l'shamayim. When Moshe went up on high to get the Torah, Shama kolo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He hears Hashem's voice learning. Shu yoshev v'osek b'parshat Parah. Learning about Parshat Parah. V'omer halacha b'shem omrim Rabbi Eliezer. Hashem is apparently learning Gemara, and Hashem says, "Oh, the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer." Amar Moshe lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe says to Hashem, "Ribon ha'olamim, Master of the universe, ha'elyonim va'atachtonim b'reshutcha." The upper and the lower regions belong to you. V'ata yoshev v'omer halacha mishor shmo shel basar v'dam, and you say the halacha is like flesh and blood. How on earth? Why are you, the Almighty, quoting a mere human? Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God says, Moshe, Tzaddik echad atid la'amod ba'olami. One day a great man will arise in my world. V'atid liftach b'parshat para, and he will learn this. Tchila, Rabbi Eliezer omer, Agla bat shnata, para bat shtayim, we're not going to go into this, and he will learn this, and it'll be Rabbi Eliezer. And it's deeply, it's beautiful, it's correct. And Moshe says, wow, Ribon ha'olamim, master of the universe, Yehi ratzon milfanech sheyetzei michatzei, may he be one of my descendants. Now the following, this is how you write a midrash, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chayecha, as you will it, Shehu mechatzecha, it will be a descendant of yours. And look at the pasuk which is quoted, Hashem ha'echad Eliezer. People recognize where that pasuk is from?
Yeah, Shmot.
Shmot, about Moshe's son.
Yeah.
Moshe's son is Eliezer, right? V'shem oto ha'miyuchad Eliezer. And the name of that special righteous one is Eliezer. Right? That's the way to write a midrash. You've got these two sources, right? And they're clearly parallel to each other. Moshe goes up to Shamayim, Moshe goes up to Shamayim. In each case, we find Hashem doing something very curious, attaching crowns to the letters, learning Gemara in the name of someone. And in each case, Moshe wants to see this individual, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. But all of the parallels really serve to point out the difference. Moshe doesn't recognize what's going on in Rabbi Akiva's classroom. He feels sick because of it. Eventually he feels better, but at first he feels sick. By contrast, Rabbi Eliezer, he loves Rabbi Eliezer. He wants to be one of his descendants. He sees Rabbi Eliezer as what he is doing. Why do I think these two Gemarot are so important? Because they take what we've looked at so far and they lift it onto a cosmic level. Rabbi Akiva is developing the Torah in a completely new direction. Rabbi Eliezer is going back to Har Sinai. I want to suggest the following. Remember when we have this historical setting, we are a generation or two out from the destruction of the temple. The Mikdash lies in ruins, Yerushalayim as well. What is the future going to look like? And here we return in some ways to your earlier question about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva have two different approaches. Do we go back to what was? Do we try and recreate everything that we had before? That is Rabbi Eliezer's approach, memorizing as much as possible of the world that was and holding it together. We learned this, I heard this, I didn't hear that. Or do we go into the future? That's what Rabbi Akiva is doing. We're going to create something new. And these two midrashim in their midrashic way sort of point out Rabbi Akiva is running into the future. Moshe doesn't recognize him. Rabbi Eliezer is holding everything in the past. Even Hashem's Torah is Lefi Rabbi Eliezer. And if that's the case, then these two approaches are going to clash head on. It's not enough to say, he learns Torah this way, he learns Torah that way, because which direction is Judaism going to take as it tries to recreate itself after the Churban? That decision is going to be a clash. And this is the context for one of the best known Gemarot that there is. I'm sure many of you would have seen this Gemara beforehand, but perhaps you won't have seen it with nearly 15 introductory sources prior to getting to it, but which hopefully now creates the context of it. This is the Gemara known as Tanuro Shel Achnai. The oven. Okay, great, you all know. Okay, we can skip the source, right? The oven of Achnai. And you know what? Fair. We don't even need to read the source of it. You can read it yourself. The oven of Achnai is a great dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim.
Rabbi Yoshua.
And Rabbi Yoshua.
Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua will feature, but it's between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim as a whole as to the status of it.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have to read. Okay. Wow, gosh, this is what happens. Right? An oven which was chopped up into various pieces and then put back together. Rabbi Eliezer mataher v'chachamim matmeim. Rabbi Eliezer said, this oven is tahor, it's pure. Chachamim said, no, it's tameh. V'zehu tanuro shel achnai. This is the oven of Achnai. My Achnai, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amashmur, Shekifu Dvarim Ka'achnai. They surrounded it like a snake. Ba'oto yom, on that day, Hishiv Rabbi Eliezer kol tshuvot sheba'olam. Rabbi Eliezer gave all of the answers in the world, v'lo kiblu haimenu, and they didn't accept them from him. Amar lahem, he says, Im halacha kamoti, if the law is like me, let this carob tree prove it. And the carob tree uproots itself. And they say, no, you can't bring a proof from that. He says, if the halacha is like me, let the stream outside prove it. And the stream starts flowing in the other direction. They say, no, you can't bring a proof from that. He says, if the law is like me, let the walls of the Bet Midrash cave in. And they begin to cave in. Until Rabbi Yoshua stands up and says, if the Talmidei Chachamim are arguing, what's your purpose if you're going to fall and crush them? And we have this beautiful image of the walls. They don't straighten out of kavod to Rabbi Eliezer, but they don't fall out of kavod to Rabbi Yoshua. And then he says, if the halakha is like me, let heaven prove it. And a bat kol, a heavenly voice, comes down and says, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? Halakha kamot b'chol makom. The law is always like him. Amad Rabbi Yoshua al raglav. Rabbi Yoshua stands and says, what does he say, everybody?
Lo b'shamayim.
Lo b'shamayim. The Torah is not in heaven. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah shekvar nitna Torah mehar Sinai. The Torah has already been given. Ein anu mashgichin bevat kol. We do not listen to a heavenly voice. Now, Rabbi Yoshua is introduced here as sort of like a third character. Rabbi Yoshua is also a teacher of Rabbi Akiva and in many ways is much more similar to him. But you see, this is the moment where these two approaches clash and they come together. Rabbi Eliezer, who is appealing to the supernatural and appealing to heaven, and Shamayim is saying, yes, the halacha is like him. But it is the human creativity and the human debate which the sages, the Chachamim, Rabbi Yoshua and also Rabbi Akiva represent. This is the moment where these two opinions have this sort of train crash of these two approaches, and it is the version of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva that wins out. That we don't bring proofs from heaven, even if heaven says we are right. We are going to debate and work with one another. We have the beautiful ending of this page that one day Rabbi Natan, generations later, meets Eliyahu. And he says to Elijah, on that day, my arid kutshabrichu bahahishaka. What was Hashem doing at that moment? And he says, Kachayach, God was laughing. Nitzchuni banai, which is translated as,
my sons vanquished me.
my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. Yeah, fair. So Rabbi Riskin has the following reading of it. And I thought it was Rabbi Riskin's reading, and then I found it in the teachings of Rabbi Yechiel Miparis 800 years before Rabbi Riskin, so you have to give it to Rabbi Yechiel Miparis. Nitzchuni banai, my children have defeated me. Nitzchuni banai, the second time. Nun tzadik chet, netzach, eternal. My children have found a way to make me eternal. My children have found a way to make my Torah after the Churban nevertheless continue, be relevant, maintain. And I didn't put the continuation, beautiful, I didn't put the continuation of the Gemara on this, but Rabbi Eliezer is excommunicated at this point. They throw him out. On that day, Sarfu. They burnt all of his teachings, and he's no longer part of the Bet Midrash. And the story actually has a very tragic ending in which Rabbi Eliezer essentially lives alone, not with his colleagues, and his wife always has to prevent him from saying Tachanun. If he's able to say Tachanun and to spill out his anguish and his despair, she knows what punishment will come to the people who put him in this situation. Her brother happens to be Rabban Gamliel. It all ends with quite a lot of drama. But what you see in this story is these two approaches which we've highlighted come together and clash with one another. And the version of Rabbi Eliezer's approach is lost, it's defeated, and Rabbi Akiva's approach wins out. And now at this juncture, I want to step back and do some consideration. Here we are in the beautiful Bet Midrash, and it's amazing, it really, really is. I say this not as being polite to come to a new place, but to walk into a Bet Midrash in a different country, and to look at the beautiful Sfarim on the wall, and to know that I can learn them, and to know that wherever I am in the world I can do that. And Zachiti, that I know personally a good number of the authors, and I took a picture of a bunch of the books and sent them to my friend, Rabbi Professor Sam Liebens, and I said, oh, look what I spotted in Switzerland. I don't know who's responsible for his books, but we're very happy to know that all three of them are here. The Bet Midrash here would not exist if Rabbi Eliezer had won. You understand? The idea of the Bet Midrash in the world would not exist. Because it can't create something new. It says, I know the answer to 12 of them, I don't know the answer to 18 of them, and I'm not going to try and guess the answer to 18 of them because I haven't heard it. It's because Rabbi Akiva's approach wins. And Rabbi Yoshua, Gemara in Masechet Chagiga says, Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Ein Bet Midrash bli chidush. There is no such thing as people learning together without something new being said. And it's because the two of them win that we have this. And that is the victory, and that is the triumph of the Avon of Achne. But here's the amazing thing. It comes with a terrible cost as well. It comes with a terrible dark side to it at the same time. Imagine what it would have been like to be a student of Rabbi Eliezer. It might have been quite boring, right? This person said this thing, this person said this thing. It's like taking down the notes. In Rabbi Akiva's Bet Midrash, it would have been exciting. People debating with each other. That is the Bet Midrash that we know. People arguing with each other. Look at this Gemara, source number 14. Rabbi Akiva is not mentioned in this Gemara, but it captures the approach which we can imagine Rabbi Akiva was trying to teach. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, afilu ha'av u'beno harav v'talmido. Father, son, parent, child, teacher and student. Shoskin b'Torah, when they learn Torah together with one another. B'shar echad na'asim oivim ze et ze. At one gate, when they enter in, they become enemies with each other. I am going to learn this text, and I am going to have my take on it, and I'm going to be convinced I'm correct. And you, my study partner, you're going to do exactly the same thing, and we're going to fight with each other. And the creative process of Talmud Torah is an adversarial one, oivim. They are enemies with one another. And he continues, Einam zazim misham. They're not allowed to finish. They don't move from there until they return to be friends, or as the phrase we use, until they return to be chavrutot again. But take this Gemara seriously. The creative process which Rabbi Akiva is teaching is one which by definition involves me viewing you as my enemy. I am right, you are wrong, and we are going to fight it out together. And that contains within it a real danger. We'll skip to the last Gemara. One day, Talmid Echad, Mitalmidei Rabbi Akiva shechala. A student of Rabbi Akiva's became sick, and the phrase chala in Chazal generally means deathly sick, life-threatening. Lo nichnesu chachamim levokro. The sages in the Bet Midrash, his colleagues, did not go and visit him. V'nichnas Rabbi Akiva levokro. Rabbi Akiva went to visit him. Ubishvil shekibdu v'ribtzu lefanav chaya. Because he cared for him and looked after him, the student survived. Amar lo Rabbi hechitani, you saved my life. Rabbi Akiva went back to the Bet Midrash v'darash. Kol mi she'ein mevaker cholim ki'ilu shofech damim. Anyone who doesn't visit the sick is as if they have spilt blood. And I want to suggest it's not a coincidence that this took place in the Bet Midrash of Rabbi Akiva. that specifically in a bet midrash which focuses so much on intellect and creativity and personal brilliance, where everybody is na'asim oivim ze et ze, they have to become enemies with one another. It will create the beautiful world of Talmudic brilliance and creativity, and it will bring with it the danger of real damage bein adam lachavero, of real violence being done to individual relationships. The phrase most associated with Rabbi Akiva is Amar Rabbi Akiva zek la'adol b'Torah v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Why is that Rabbi Akiva's klal gadol? We often think of it because he knew it was the most important things that he wanted to say it. Perhaps he saw the danger specifically within his students. You could ask yourself, when does he say it? Does he say it before his students die? Does he say it after his students have died? Right? Sometimes a teacher, the thing that they will become most associated with is precisely the mirror image of the problem that they are perceiving in their community. He sees the danger within it. He is the big enough person who is able to be this great creative leader and also be the one who cares for people and looks after the sick, etc. But his students are not able to necessarily handle that. How many students does he have that die?
Pairs.
Yafeh. Very good. Everybody says how many students die? 24,000. But that's not what the Gemara says.
12
Go back
pairs.
to the first source. Source number 1. Amru 12,000 zugim. Talmidim hayu lo Rabbi Akiva. 12,000 sets of students did he have. It's a funny way of saying the number. As a function of their chavruta which was not chavruti, as a function of their learning, did they perish. To sum up, this is I hope, a beautiful shiur and a powerful shiur precisely because it shows something which is truly complex and nuanced. The story of the Avon of Achnai is at one and the same time both the triumph and the tragedy. It captures the brilliance and the creativity that Rabbi Akiva and his students are able to develop, but also the terrible potential cost that can bring with us. And to just set it within this time of year, obviously it applies to Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is the day that the plague ends, but perhaps it fits with the idea of the Omer leading up to Shavuot. That Shavuot is Matan Torah. It's the moment at which Shamayim opens and Hashem gives us the Torah. And it is a way of equalizing all of us. That the greatest sage and the youngest child are identical to one another compared to facing Hashem, receiving the Torah from Hashem. And the Omer is a process and a moment of we spend all of our days, all of our years arguing with each other and trying to debate and create the best communities that we have. And Shavuot is something of a corrective to our abilities to allow our arguments to not just create light, but to also create heat as well. Be'ezrat Hashem, our learning should always be ones which, even if we invoke our creativity, should end with our not leaving until we love one another as well, should create not just brilliant ideas, but also create relationships as well. Very, very excited for the rest of the weekend's learning with you and looking forward.